Sir, may I sit in that corner until the snow eases up? Get him away from me. Please, sir. I won't touch anything. Touch anything. You're already stinking up my marble. You smell like something crawled out of a dumpster and died. Please. I only need somewhere warm for a little while. Give me that book. Sir, please. Contract law. Did you steal this from a real student? No, sir. It belonged to my mother. Then go get it. The book flew through the open doors and landed in the snow. Fetch. Mr. Sterling, that book is all he has. Do your job, Amos. People nearby lifted their phones. Film it if you want. Maybe the city needs to see what happens when people mistake my lobby for a shelter. Sir, what now? Page 30 of your draft agreement. Clause 14B. Read it before you sign. Everett Sterling stopped. What did you say? Schedule C. Read who receives the intellectual property at closing. The young man tightened his gray coat around himself. If you sign that agreement, you'll lose everything that makes your company valuable. Everett stared at him for a moment, then laughed. It begs, it reads, and now it lies. Get him out of here with the rest of his trash. The guards moved in. The young man did not fight them. You'll lose everything in that contract, he said again. Everything. Soon, the same chief executive officer who had thrown him into the snow would be searching shelters, libraries, train stations, and church basements across the city. Desperate to find the stranger he had refused to hear. But to understand why that warning mattered, you have to understand who the young man was and why he had learned that one unread sentence could cost a person almost everything. His name was Dorian Mercer. I was 19 years old, thin from too many missed meals, and almost always wrapped in the same gray coat. A public library on the east side had become the closest thing he had to an address. The librarians knew him well. Dorian came in whenever the doors opened, took the corner table near the window, and read until closing. He never raised his voice. He never slept at the table, even when exhaustion pulled heavily at his eyes. He never left food wrappers behind because he rarely had food to unwrap. He read contract law with the concentration other young men his age gave to sports scores. He read fast, but never carelessly. Sometimes his lips moved as he followed a difficult paragraph, testing each word against the next. The thick handbook he carried everywhere had belonged to his mother, Renee Mercer. Renee had worked as a paralegal at a downtown law firm. Attorneys who worked with her admitted privately that she was sharper than many of the people whose names appeared on the letterhead. She could catch a bad definition before breakfast, rebuild a broken chronology before lunch, and find the one sentence in a 100-page agreement that everyone else had skimmed. At home, she taught Dorian the same habit. They would sit together at a small kitchen table while she opened the handbook between them. The margins were crowded with her looping blue handwriting. Contracts are stories, she used to tell him. Every word is a witness. Find the word that lies, and you'll usually find the truth hiding next to it. Then Renee became ill, and the insurance company found a word that lied. The policy looked generous until her illness became serious. Buried on page 60 was an exclusion built around one definition. Nobody had bothered to explain when the policy was purchased. When Renee needed coverage most, the insurer pointed to those words and denied the claim. The savings disappeared first, then the apartment. Then the medical bills consumed what little remained. Renee died in a county hospital bed holding her son's hand. She had no property to leave him, no trust fund, no house, no collection of jewelry, only the handbook and one final instruction. Keep reading. So Dorian did. Every page became another conversation with her. When he lost the apartment, he carried the book with him. When shelters filled before he reached them, he carried it onto trains. When winter made every sidewalk feel hostile, he held it inside his coat, like something alive. The city did not negotiate with cold. Shelter beds disappeared quickly. Train cars were warmer than sidewalks, but not always safe. Doorways offered cover from wind, but security guards usually moved people along before they could settle. That was how Amos Caldwell entered Dorian's life. Amos had worked security at Sterling Dynamics Tower for more than 2 decades. He remembered when the lobby's marble had still looked newly poured. He knew which executives stayed late, which maintenance workers arrived before anyone else, and which cameras missed the narrow space behind the large planter near the side entrance. On one bitter winter night, Amos found Dorian crouched behind the loading dock. The young man's lips had turned blue. His hands shook badly. The contract handbook was pressed against his chest under his coat. Amos stood there for a long moment. Then he opened a side door. "Corner behind the planter," he said. "The heat vent runs all night. You leave before the morning crowd arrives." Dorian looked at him. "Why are you helping me?" Amos shrugged. "Because Cole doesn't care whether you've earned it." Dorian nodded. "I promise I'll be gone before anybody has to see me." For several weeks, Dorian kept that promise exactly. He slipped in after the tower emptied and left before the lobby filled. He never touched anything. He never slept across the furniture. He never left trash. Most nights he simply sat behind the planter with his mother's handbook open across his knees, warmed by the vent and protected from the wind. Then, one exhausted associate from the merger team changed everything without knowing it. The associate came down from the elevators carrying too many papers and muttering to himself about revisions. A misprinted draft of the proposed merger agreement went into the recycling bin beside the elevator bank. The cover page landed face up. Dorian noticed it from behind the planter. He told himself not to touch it. That corner was the safest place he had found in years. Reading something that did not belong to him could get Amos in trouble. It could get Dorian thrown out. He looked away. Then his mother's voice seemed to return from a kitchen that no longer existed. "Every word is a witness." Dorian waited until the lobby was empty. Then he carefully lifted the draft from the recycling bin. The agreement covered a transaction worth roughly $400 million. He read beneath his coat using a cheap flashlight. Most of the document was ordinary. Definitions, representations, schedules, closing conditions. Language polished until it looked boring enough to trust. Then, Dorian reached page 30. Clause 14b defined ancillary intellectual property. The definition ran longer than it needed to. That bothered him immediately. His mother had taught him that when a definition grows wider than the business reason for it, somebody may be trying to make the word carry more than the reader notices. Dorian read the clause once, then again, then a third time, following every cross-reference. The definition reached beyond the assets everyone would naturally associate with the transaction. It swept in patents, patent applications, technical data, know-how, improvements, inventions, trade secrets, and other intellectual property owned, controlled, licensed, or used by Sterling Dynamics and its affiliates. Then, Clause 14b pointed to Schedule C. Schedule C described an automatic transfer at closing. The recipient was a Delaware company called Arden Intellectual Property Holdings. The agreement did not explain who really owned that company. Dorian stared at the pages. The transaction was described publicly as a merger. On paper, it looked more like a harvest. If the language operated as written, Sterling Dynamics could close the deal, believing it had joined forces with Arden Capital, only to discover that the patents at the heart of the company had been transferred into a separate holding company. Dorian read the clause again. He followed the definitions backward and forward. There was no obvious signature required for the transfer after closing. The assignment would happen automatically. He sat behind the planter, with his mother's handbook beside him, and felt the old memory of page 60 return. One definition, one page, one overlooked sentence. A family learns the price only after the signature matters. Dorian could have put the draft back and said nothing. Warning Everett Sterling might cost him his warm corner. I knew that. But somewhere in his memory, a hospital monitor had gone quiet because people had not read carefully enough. So Dorian found a pencil stub and wrote 5 short lines on a scrap of paper. Clause 14b, Schedule C, Ancillary Definition Too Broad. Transfer at closing. Who owns the holding company? He returned the draft to the recycling bin exactly where he had found it. Then he spent the following day rehearsing how to say the warning. He practiced in the library bathroom mirror because he believed he might receive only a few seconds of a powerful man's attention. I was right about receiving only seconds. I was wrong about what those seconds would contain. When Everett Sterling entered the lobby during the next snowstorm, Dorian stepped forward. "Sir, may I speak with you?" Everett looked at the gray coat first, then the worn shoes, then the book under Dorian's arm. Before Dorian could explain, irritation crossed the chief executive officer's face. "How did you get in here?" Dorian tried to tell him about page 30. Everett did not listen. I insulted the young man in front of employees and visitors. I took Renee's handbook and tossed it outside into the snow. When Dorian said the book had belonged to his mother, Everett told him to fetch it. People laughed. Some raised phones. Amos tried to intervene. Everett turned on him too. "Do your job, Amos." The guards escorted Dorian outside. Even as they moved him through the doors, he kept trying. Page 30, Clause 14. B. Read it before you sign. Schedule C. Find out who owns the holding company. Everett dismissed him. Dorian crossed the sidewalk, picked up his mother's handbook from the snow, and knelt beneath the building's glass facade. The pages were wet. He dried each one carefully with his sleeve. Inside, people watched through the glass. Some were still laughing. Dorian stood, turned up the collar of his gray coat, and walked into the city without looking back. The building was not finished taking things from people. Security footage was reviewed. Someone discovered the side entrance opening repeatedly during the night. Amos Caldwell was called upstairs. An operations executive placed a termination letter in front of him. "More than 2 decades, the man said, and you traded all of it for a stray." Amos read the letter once. Then he signed it. He placed his radio on the desk and walked out with his dignity intact. But something else had happened in the lobby. While the guards were moving Dorian toward the doors, the scrap of paper, with the 5 handwritten lines, had slipped from his pocket. It slid beneath the reception desk. A cleaner found it later and nearly threw it away. For reasons nobody could explain afterward, it was tucked into a stack of messages sent upstairs to Everett Sterling. Everett found the note on his desk. He read the 5 lines. Clause 14B. Schedule C. Ancillary definition too broad. Transfer at closing. Who owns the holding company? I told himself it was nonsense. He poured a drink, answered emails, signed routine papers. Then he read the note again. The handwriting was small and almost ruler straight. There was no wasted motion in it. Everett remembered the gray coat, the young man's calm voice. Page 30. Clause 14B. Read it before you sign. He also remembered the book landing in the snow. And the word he had used, fetch. Late that night, Everett called Meredith Sloan, Sterling Dynamics General Counsel. Meredith was the one attorney in his life he trusted to deliver ugly truths without decorating them first. "Probably nothing," Everett said. "But look anyway." He sent her the note and the relevant draft. Meredith called him back after working through the document. Her voice sounded different. "Everett, where did you get this? Why?" "Because whoever wrote that note just found a problem nobody on the deal team found." Meredith walked him through it. Clause 14B reached beyond the core transaction and captured virtually every important patent the company owned. Schedule C transferred those assets automatically at closing. The receiving entity, Arden Intellectual Property Holdings, appeared nowhere meaningful outside the transfer mechanism. On paper, it looked like a stranger. "If we sign this as written," Meredith said, "the patents leave." Everett stood at his office window. The city glowed below him. "And this company is the patents," Meredith continued. "The buildings are just where we keep them." The board had already celebrated the transaction. Harrison Keene, the powerful head of Arden Capital, had already prepared the press release. Meredith asked the question Everett did not want to answer. "Who caught this? Which firm? I want to hire them before someone else does." Everett looked down toward the lobby. The corner behind the planter was empty. "It wasn't a firm," he said quietly. "I did not sleep." As soon as the city began waking, Everett was downstairs in a coat over his suit. He asked security where the young man had gone. Nobody knew. He asked his name. Nobody knew that either. That realization landed harder than he expected. Hundreds of people had watched a human being be humiliated in his lobby, and almost nobody had bothered to ask what he was called. The shelters had no useful record because Dorian rarely arrived before the beds filled. All Everett had was a description pulled from security footage. Tall young man, gray coat, worn book. The lobby clip had already started traveling from phone to phone. A junior analyst at Arden Capital eventually saw it. Most people watching focused on the humiliation. The analyst froze when Dorian said one sentence. Page 30, Clause 14b. The clip was forwarded upward with one word. Urgent. Across town, Harrison Keene learned that somebody had read the clause. Everett Sterling had built a company valued in the billions on the belief that almost anything could be located, measured, purchased, or controlled. That belief collapsed quickly. He began visiting shelters himself. He stood in lines of tired people, holding a still image printed from the lobby cameras. People looked at his coat, his shoes, and the expensive watch on his wrist. Some said they did not know Dorian. Others looked as though they knew but had no interest in helping the man whose company had thrown him into a snowstorm. Meredith bought time with the deal lawyers by asking for additional due diligence. Arden's representatives responded with smooth concern and polite pressure. A gift basket arrived at Sterling Dynamics with a handwritten card from Harrison Keene. Looking forward to closing, Everett. Everett read it several times. It no longer felt friendly. It felt like a countdown. Eventually, a shelter director gave him the first useful advice. "You're asking strangers," she said. "Ask the person who gave him access to that heat vent." The kid trusted somebody. It obviously wasn't you. That led Everett to Amos Caldwell. Amos lived in a narrow brick house with a flag hanging over the porch. More than 2 decades of loyalty to Sterling Dynamics had been folded into a drawer with his old uniform. When Amos opened the door and found Everett standing there in the cold, he did not look surprised. He looked patient. "Mr. Sterling, Amos, I need to find him." Amos almost smiled. "Funny thing, a few days ago, you wanted him gone. Now you want him found." Everett took the criticism without defending himself. "The boy is worth more to you than your deal," Amos continued, "and you don't even know his name." "Then tell me his name." Amos allowed the silence to sit between them. "You don't deserve to find him," he said finally. Everett looked down. "I know, but it's freezing tonight," Amos continued. "And he's still out there." He grabbed his coat. "So I'll tell you where he reads. Not for you, for him." Everett stepped aside as Amos joined him. "And I'm coming with you," Amos added. "If he sees your face alone, he'll disappear before you cross the room." Neither man knew another search had already begun. At Arden Capital, attorney Malcolm Pierce studied the lobby recording frame by frame. "Find the boy before Sterling does," he told 2 associates. "Offer him whatever it takes." One associate hesitated. "Why?" Malcolm's expression did not change. "A kid sleeping outside will sign almost anything for a warm bed. I want Clause 14b forgotten before this deal comes back to the table." The East Side Library smelled of old paper and warm radiators. Everett saw Dorian before Dorian saw him. The gray coat hung over the back of a chair. Dorian sat at the corner table beside 2 younger children from a nearby shelter. I was helping them read a rental agreement. "This word here means the landlord has to repair the heat," Dorian explained. "Circle it." One child circled the sentence carefully. "If somebody tells you that you have no rights," Dorian said, "you show them the circle. Then you ask them to read it with you." Everett stopped in the doorway. He employed roughly 9,000 people. I had argued with senators, negotiated with billionaires, closed transactions that moved markets. Yet he suddenly felt afraid to interrupt a homeless teenager teaching children about heating clauses. Amos crossed the room first. Dorian stood. The 2 held on to each other for a moment. Dorian said something quietly that made Amos laugh and wipe at one eye. Then Dorian noticed Everett. His face did not become angry. It simply closed, politely, like a business shutting down for the night. "Mr. Mercer," Everett said. "Dorian." Everett nodded. "Dorian, My general counsel reviewed Clause 14b. The young man waited. You were right. Everett placed a checkbook on the table. You saw what a room full of expensive lawyers missed, and I threw you into the snow for trying to tell me. Dorian looked at the checkbook. Name any number, Everett said. Any number. I owe you. Dorian closed the checkbook gently and slid it back across the table. It was the same motion a teacher might use when returning the wrong answer to a student. I can give you anything, Everett said. You already took the only thing I asked for. Everett looked confused. A warm corner, Dorian said. The radiator clicked softly behind them. I don't want rescue, Mr. Sterling. I want respect. There's a difference. Everett looked toward Amos. Then tell me what respect looks like. Dorian reached into his mother's handbook and removed a folded page. He smoothed it flat on the table. 4 short conditions were written in the same small ruler-straight handwriting. Dorian read them aloud. First, you apologize to me in your lobby, in front of the same people who watched you throw me out. You say my name when you do it. Everett listened. Second, Amos Caldwell gets his job back with full back pay and a formal apology in writing. He isn't a security expense. He's the only person in that building who remembered what security is supposed to protect. Amos looked away. Third, I don't accept gifts. If you believe I can help your company, give me a real position on the legal research team, real salary, real work, real performance reviews. The day I stop earning it, fire me like anyone else. Everett gave the smallest nod. Fourth, you read my mother's handbook. Every page, every note in the margins. Dorian folded the paper once. If you want to know who saved your company, Mr. Sterling, it wasn't me, it was her. He placed the page between them. Those are my terms. They're not negotiable. For the first time, a hint of humor touched Dorian's face. You, of all people, should appreciate clear drafting. Everett read the 4 lines slowly. For years, almost nobody had told him what to do. Then the man whose company was worth billions said one word. Agreed. I extended his hand. Dorian did not take it immediately. He looked at Amos. The old guard gave him the smallest possible nod. Years of instability had taught Dorian that promises were cheap and warmth was expensive. His mother had taught him something else. People read contracts. Contracts also read people. Dorian shook Everett's hand once. Firm. Brief. No champagne. No cameras. Just terms accepted. Soon after, Sterling Dynamics called its employees into the lobby. The same marble floor. The same planter. Many of the same receptionists, analysts, guards, assistants, and executives who had watched Dorian be humiliated. Amos stood near the planter, wearing a crisp new uniform. Beside him stood Dorian in his gray coat, Renee's handbook tucked beneath one arm. Everett did not use the microphone, prepared for him. I wanted the apology to require his own voice. Recently, in this lobby, a young man asked me for a corner out of the cold. Everett began. The room became quiet. I called him trash. I took the book his mother left him and threw it into the snow. Some of you laughed. Everett paused. I made it safe for you to laugh. Nobody moved. That may be the worst thing I've done in this building, Everett continued, and I've made decisions I am not proud of. Phones came out again, but the hands holding them were less confident this time. His name is Dorian Mercer. Everett turned toward him. Say it carefully, because you'll be hearing it. He faced the employees again. While we walked past him, Dorian found the clause that could have gutted this company. 11 lawyers reviewed this transaction. Their firms billed us millions of dollars. They missed it. Everett looked at Dorian. A 19-year-old read the agreement once in the dark and caught what the rest of us missed in bright offices. He drew a breath. So, Dorian, I am sorry. For the snow, for the word I used, for throwing your mother's book away, for every door this building closed on you while you were busy protecting the people inside it. Then Everett turned toward Amos. Mr. Caldwell, more than 2 decades of service. Welcome back. The lobby stayed silent. Then Everett did something almost nobody captured properly, because people were too surprised to react. He bent down, picked up Dorian's worn duffel bag, and carried it toward the elevator himself. "Your desk is upstairs," Everett said. "Legal research is waiting for you." The clip spread everywhere. It moved through the city, then through business networks and industry channels. Eventually, it reached a glass office at Arden Capital. Harrison Keene watched the apology several times. The young man from the lobby now had a name, a company badge, and access to the deal files. Harrison placed his espresso down. His voice remained pleasant. "Malcolm, get me everything you can find on Dorian Mercer. Where he slept, where he ate, where his mother worked, where she died. Everything." Harrison understood something Everett was still too relieved to recognize. The deal was not finished, and the most dangerous provisions might no longer be the ones hidden in the original draft. Dorian's arrival on the legal research floor did not inspire universal warmth. The team was filled with associates from elite universities. They had seen the lobby video. They also understood what it implied. If a homeless 19-year-old with no degree had found what they missed, then the clip did not only embarrass the attorneys who reviewed the transaction. It embarrassed everyone whose framed diploma had always opened doors automatically. So Dorian's welcome consisted of several heavy boxes placed beside a desk and a smile containing no kindness. "Vendor contracts," said a senior associate named Rowan Blake. "Hundreds of pages. Renewals. Mostly boilerplate. Flag anything unusual." It was the kind of assignment people gave interns when they wanted to bury them beneath boring work. Rowan expected the boxes back untouched or covered in beginner mistakes. Dorian removed his coat, sat down, opened the first contract, and read. He read the way Renee taught him. Pencil moving. Every definition tested. Every cross-reference followed. Every word called to testify. He barely looked up. Later, Dorian knocked on Rowan's office door. He placed one sheet of paper on the desk. 11 lines. 11 problems. 9 were ordinary drafting weaknesses. Old language. Ambiguous notice provisions. Definitions that had drifted over years of amendments. The 10th was a renewal clause that had been automatically increasing charges by 4% over repeated extensions because nobody had renegotiated it. The 11th mattered most. A logistics agreement contained a penalty clause triggered by any change in ownership, even partial ownership. Buried, dormant, pointed directly at the merger. Sterling Dynamics had almost completed. Had the Arden transaction closed, that paragraph alone could have cost the company about $2 million. Rowan read the page once. Then again, he stood without saying anything and carried the document directly to Meredith Sloan. For a man like Rowan, that silence was almost applause. Meredith called Dorian into her office. She slid the page back toward him. "Who taught you to read like this?" "My mother, Renee Mercer. She was a paralegal." "Where did she practice?" Dorian considered the question. "Kitchen table, mostly." Meredith smiled. Then she cleared the chair opposite her desk, a chair usually buried beneath files. "From now on, that chair is yours." Dorian looked at her. "You'll still do your assigned work," Meredith said. "But when I read something important, you read it after me." 2 sets of eyes, mine and whatever your mother left inside yours. The building slowly learned better manners. Receptionists who had laughed in the lobby now said good morning carefully, like people handling something they had once dropped and broken. The children Dorian tutored began visiting after school because he had asked for access to the company's law library as the only extra benefit he wanted. Amos patrolled the lobby wearing his restored uniform. Whenever he passed the corner behind the planter, he sometimes brushed his fingertips against the wall, the way people touch a scar after it stops hurting. One night, Everett came to Dorian's floor carrying 2 bags of takeout. Meredith had mentioned that the new researcher often stayed until the cleaners arrived. Everett sat on a borrowed chair beside Dorian's desk. They ate noodles over stacks of indemnity riders. At first they talked about nothing important. Weather, elevator music, the cafeteria coffee. Eventually, Everett asked the question he had been carrying. "Why did you warn me?" Dorian looked up. "After what I did to you," Everett continued. "You owed me nothing." Dorian rested his chopsticks on the container. My mother died because nobody read page 60. Everett said nothing. You were about to lose your company because nobody read page 30. Dorian looked toward the windows. She would have said it doesn't matter whether we like the person we're protecting. We read for them anyway. Everett studied him. Your mother would have hated me. For a while, Dorian said. Everett almost smiled. And after that, she would have tried to fix you. She fixed everything. Everett kept Dorian's fourth condition for last. At night, alone in his penthouse, he read Renee Mercer's handbook. The book itself was ordinary, a professional practice guide that had aged beyond the current edition. But the margins contained another book entirely. Renee's blue ink argued with the printed text, corrected it, questioned it, made jokes beside it. Next to a section on penalty clauses, she had written that the real penalty is rarely the number itself. It is the fear the number creates. Next to a section on good faith, she had written that powerful people often call something good faith right up until someone catches them doing it. Then Everett reached page 212. Between a notice provision and a diagram about indemnity flows, Renee had written a sentence that had nothing to do with legal doctrine. Teach Dorian that being unseen is not being unworthy. Everett closed the book. He sat for a long time beside a window high above the city. High had spent most of his adult life being the most visible person in almost every room he entered, and he cried for a woman he had never met, a woman at a kitchen table he had never seen, a woman who had raised the young man he had thrown into the snow. After finishing the book, Everett made two decisions. First, Sterling Dynamics formally ended negotiations with Arden Capital because of the undisclosed consequences of Clause 14B. Second, Everett ordered the area behind the lobby planter cleaned, warmed, and fitted with a long oak bench. A small brass plate was attached to it. For a while, no one explained what the plate said. The board reacted badly to the terminated deal. $400 million of expected transaction value does not disappear quietly. Some directors demanded that negotiations resume. Pension funds wanted explanations. A director, named Curtis Dalton, who had supported the deal from the beginning, confronted Everett in the boardroom. Is it true, he asked, that our corporate strategy is now being determined by what one article called a stray you feel guilty about? Everett looked at him. No. He placed the draft agreement on the table. Our strategy is being determined by Clause 14. The so-called stray just happens to be the only person who read it correctly. That answer bought Everett time, not peace. Curtis wanted the deal revived. Several directors agreed. The market had priced expectations into the company's value, and expectations often make shareholders impatient. Meredith worried about something else. Harrison Keene had gone quiet. Predators do not always attack immediately after missing. Sometimes they circle. The first circle arrived, wearing an expensive coat and a practiced smile. A woman approached Dorian in the lobby and introduced herself as a program director for the Northbridge Opportunity Foundation. She said the foundation had seen his story and found it inspiring. They wanted to offer him a full scholarship, housing included. Any law school willing to admit him, and with his story, she said warmly, many would. She placed a beautiful cream-colored packet on the oak bench. Take your time, she said. Dreams shouldn't be rushed. Dorian, read the offer. The scholarship was real. The housing was real. So was Section 8, Paragraph 3. The foundation reserved exclusive rights to Dorian's story, likeness and cooperation in media, litigation, legal proceedings, and public statements. The foundation considered beneficial. Dorian followed the definitions. Cooperation, beneficial, exclusive rights. He reached the back page. The foundation's registered agent was listed at a Delaware address. Dorian knew the address. High had memorized it from Schedule C. He clicked the woman's expensive pen closed and returned the papers. Tell Mr. Keene. The drafting is better this time, he said. Her smile remained in place. Dorian tapped the packet. Section 8 still gives away too much. If I sign this, Arden controls my story, And the first thing you'll call beneficial is my silence about Clause 14b. I handed it back. Tell him I said no. Dorian paused. And tell him I said it politely. The woman's smile did not move, but everything behind it seemed to pack up and leave. She walked away without another word. Dorian sat alone on the warm oak bench. His hands were steady. His heart was not. For the first time, he understood that some of the richest and most powerful people in the city now knew his name, and not all of them wanted good things for him. That night, Amos's wife, Nora, insisted Dorian come to dinner. The Caldwell house smelled like roast chicken, warm bread, and lemon cleaner. Nora filled his plate as if feeding him could settle a debt the city owed. Amos told stories from years of lobby security until Dorian laughed hard enough to put down his fork. For a few hours there were no clauses, no schedules, no Delaware entities, no cameras, only gravy, an old couch, a baseball game with the volume low, and the comfortable noise of a home. When Dorian left the table, Nora handed him leftovers. She did not ask where he would sleep. Amos had already fixed the room above their garage. The question answered itself when they reached the porch. That night, Dorian lay in a real bed, listening to a furnace instead of a lobby heat vent. For a few hours, he almost felt safe enough to trust the feeling. Then Arden Capital answered. A courier delivered a lawsuit to Sterling Dynamics. Dozens of pages, perfect formatting, heavy paper. Arden Capital accused Sterling Dynamics of breaching an exclusive negotiation agreement, abandoning a signed letter of intent, and interfering with the transaction. The damages claimed reached $60 million. The complaint explained the alleged cause carefully. Sterling Dynamics had terminated negotiations based on advice from an unvetted individual with no legal credentials who had obtained confidential deal documents while trespassing on company property. News outlets had the story almost immediately. The story was no longer about Clause 14b. It was about Dorian. The headlines were polished and poisonous. Billionaire destroys $400 million deal, based on homeless teenager's warning. One presenter showed the lobby video. Another quoted an unnamed Arden source calling Dorian the sidewalk consultant. Dorian sat at his desk on the legal research floor and read the complaint from beginning to end. Then he read it again. The city moved noisily beyond the windows. They were no longer attacking only the company. They were attacking him. And on page 31 of their own lawsuit, Harrison Keene's legal team had made the first mistake that might matter. Sterling Dynamics' stock dropped sharply. Then it fell again. Numbers like that create a sound inside a company. Phones ring differently. Office doors close more carefully. Thousands of employees keep doing their jobs while quietly wondering whether those jobs will exist after the next headline. Arden's media operation kept feeding the story. Soon, the phrase sidewalk consultant appeared in television graphics. Panels of experts debated whether Everett Sterling had lost his judgment after being publicly shamed in the lobby. Then reporters began following Amos. A photographer waited outside the Caldwell house and photographed him carrying garbage to the curb. The image ran beneath a mocking headline. Someone leaked Renee Mercer's name. A tabloid described her death as part of a tragic spiral, as though poverty had been weather instead of consequences. A business website published supposed shelter. Intake information about Dorian that should have been private and was not even accurate. Reporters called the company's legal library, asking whether Dorian had a criminal record. I did not. Soon, millions of strangers suspected he might. Malcolm Pierce built Arden's legal argument around one word: trespassing. Dorian was trespassing when he read the document. The agreement was confidential. Therefore, Arden argued, the warning was tainted by unlawful access. It was a clean narrative. It transformed the person mistreated in the lobby into the alleged wrongdoer who contaminated the deal. Harrison Keene gave one television interview. He sat in a studio chair wearing a soft gray suit, sounding patient and reasonable. I admire the young man, truly, he said. It's a remarkable story, but business depends on signed agreements, not emotion. He looked toward the interviewer. If a company can abandon a binding commitment because a trespasser with no legal training frightens its chief executive officer, then no transaction in this country is secure. His expression turned regretful. I take no pleasure in this. $60 million is simply the cost of a broken promise at our level. The clip played again and again. Many viewers found him persuasive. Meredith Sloan assembled a litigation team. For the first time, Dorian sat at a conference table as the central subject of a major lawsuit rather than someone reading about one. Meredith placed the complaint in front of him. They will subpoena you. Malcolm Pierce wants you under oath and afraid. Dorian nodded. He'll try to turn you into the thief in this story, so we start with the worst questions. Meredith leaned forward. Did you take the merger draft out of the building? No. Did you photograph it? No. Did you copy it? I didn't need to. Meredith watched him. Why? Dorian answered quietly. I remember it. Rowan Blake looked at Meredith. A 19-year-old with no assets was about to face a litigation department backed by enormous resources, and much of his factual defense rested on memory and a recycling bin. They drilled him again and again. Rowan played Malcolm Pierce, high-paced, sneered, asked questions designed to humiliate instead of inform. Where were you sleeping, Mr. Mercer? What did you eat that week? What were you wearing when security removed you? Questions like that can make a witness feel small in front of strangers. Small witnesses rush. Small witnesses become defensive. Small witnesses stumble. Dorian answered slowly, plainly, again and again. Eventually, Rowan stopped acting. He's going to underestimate you, he said. Dorian looked up. Rowan almost smiled. I hope he does. Then Rowan brought up something he had found. There's a pattern. He placed research on the table. Arden bought a sensor company in Ohio. The founder sued afterward, claiming patents were moved into a holding entity before the acquisition dust settled. The case was sealed. Meredith began taking notes. Rowan continued. Another materials company in Pennsylvania went through something similar. Acquired. Intellectual property moved. Original business hollowed out. Litigation settled under seal. 2 prior targets, Meredith said. Same structure. If we can connect Arden intellectual property holdings directly to Harrison Keene, the exclusive negotiation agreement becomes vulnerable, because fraud can unwind everything it touches. Everett appeared in the doorway. Can we connect him? Meredith shook her head. Not yet. Delaware does not have to tell us the beneficial owner publicly. The older settlements are sealed. Keene's name appears nowhere that matters. She tapped the corporate documents. That is the point of the structure. Then, a settlement offer arrived. It was almost elegant in its cruelty. Arden Capital would drop the entire $60 million claim. Sterling Dynamics would pay nothing. The merger negotiations could even restart on improved terms. Clause 14B would be removed. The intellectual property transfer would be made transparent. Arden would absorb much of its own legal cost and describe the conflict publicly as a misunderstanding between business partners. There was one condition. Sterling Dynamics had to issue a public statement saying the company terminated negotiations because of a false analysis provided by an unauthorized individual who had unlawfully accessed confidential materials. The individual would be named Dorian Mercer. Trade the boy. Keep the company. Curtis Dalton read the offer to the board. It's a gift, Everett. The stock recovers. We issue one sentence about one kid, and this nightmare ends. Everett looked at him. The sentence is a lie. Curtis leaned forward. This is $60 million and the company your father built against a press release. Everett studied the people around the table. Some he had promoted. Some he had made wealthy. Some he had defended through difficult moments. He could count the votes and knew he did not have enough. I threw him into the snow once, Everett said. Nobody interrupted. I won't do it again on company letterhead. He stood. If this board wants that statement, you'll need a different signature. Everett looked from one director to another. And you should understand something else. His analysis wasn't false. 11 experienced lawyers later confirmed it. Dorian's only offense was being correct in a building where nobody expected him to be. The board gave Everett until the arbitration decision. If the $60 million claim stood, his resignation would be considered with it. Something small happened during that same period. Engineers Dorian had never met began stopping by his floor. One left coffee on his desk. Another left a handwritten note. My team's patents were in Schedule C. Thank you. 9,000 employees had done their own calculation. It was not Curtis Dalton's calculation. But Dorian still struggled. One night the words on the page would not stay still. The room above, the Caldwell garage, suddenly felt borrowed, the way nearly everything in his life had once felt temporary. Amos found him sitting quietly in the kitchen. The old guard looked at Dorian's face, reached for his coat, and said 2 words. Walk with me. They went to a shelter where Amos knew the staff. In the common room, children were doing homework under buzzing lights. A little girl, named Sophie, one of Dorian's students, saw him and immediately demanded that he inspect her vocabulary list. Dorian sat beside her. He checked every word, somewhere between necessary and receive. His hands stopped shaking. They're saying you stole something, Sophie said without looking up. On television. Did you? No. What did you do? I read something someone had thrown away. Sophie frowned. Then why are they mad? Because reading it cost them $400 million. Sophie considered the information with complete seriousness. Then you should read more stuff, she said. Dorian laughed for the first time in days. Outside, Amos lit the one cigarette Nora allowed him during what she called genuine emergencies. I spent years in the army and years guarding that lobby, he said. Want to know the whole secret? Dorian waited. Stay when it's hard. Amos exhaled into the cold. That's it. Anyone can stand a post on a sunny day. Dorian looked toward the shelter windows. What if I cost them the company? What if $60 million lands on Sterling because I couldn't keep quiet? Amos took his time answering. Son, you didn't write that clause. He looked directly at Dorian. You just refused to let it bite a man who had already been cruel to you. Amos flicked ash toward the pavement. There are people in office towers who go their whole lives without doing anything that clean. He put out the cigarette. You'll stay. You stayed through nights colder than this. A conference room cannot hurt you the way this city already tried to. The arbitration hearing approached. The arbitrator was retired. Judge Evelyn Ward, known for reading every exhibit and having very little patience for theater. Malcolm Pierce placed Dorian on Arden's witness list. Before the hearing, Dorian sat at the desk above the Caldwell garage, surrounded by exhibits, the complaint, and Renee's handbook. He read the documents again. Every word is a witness. The phrase moved through his mind as naturally as breathing. At some point, Dorian remembered another sentence. Take your time. Dreams shouldn't be rushed. The words came from the woman who had offered the scholarship, the Northbridge Opportunity Foundation. 11 cream-colored pages. Dorian closed his eyes and walked through the document from memory. Section 8, Paragraph 3. Exclusive rights. Registered agent. Back page. Signature block. Authorized officer. A name, in small type, above the Delaware address. Tobias Marsh. Dorian's eyes opened. He pulled Arden's lawsuit closer. Exhibit 4 contained the exclusive negotiation agreement. Attached to it was Arden Capital's corporate authorization. The document had been sworn, certified, and filed by Malcolm Pierce's own team. Dorian turned to page 31. Authorizing officer, Tobias Marsh. The same name. Dorian sat completely still. The man signing for the foundation that tried to buy his silence had also signed corporate authorization for the fund suing Sterling Dynamics. And if one more memory was right, that name could connect to the entity at the end of Schedule C. Arden Intellectual Property Holdings. Harrison Keene had hidden himself behind layers of paper. But paper eventually needs a human signature, and one human had apparently been very busy. Dorian called Meredith. She answered quickly. Meredith, I know how to find the owner of the holding company. Silence. Dorian continued, and Malcolm Pierce filed the proof himself. Meredith was fully awake now. Tell me everything. By the time the hearing began, Dorian and the legal team had traced the signature chain. The arbitration was held in a private conference suite at a hotel. No jury, no public gallery. One long table, two legal teams, retired Judge Evelyn Ward at the head, with a stack of exhibits that looked thoroughly read. Outside, reporters waited by the elevators. Inside, Harrison Keene sat beside Malcolm Pierce, wearing the same calm confidence he had displayed on television. Malcolm's opening argument was polished. The exclusive negotiation agreement was signed. The letter of intent was executed. Sterling terminated talks abruptly. Arden claimed $60 million in reliance damages. And the cause, Malcolm said, allowing the word to hang in the room, was a trespasser. A young man with no degree, no formal legal training, and no authorization read confidential documents he had no right to see. My client lost a major transaction because of gossip pulled from a recycling bin. Then Malcolm called Dorian Mercer. Dorian entered wearing a plain navy tie Nora Caldwell had carefully pressed for him. He carried nothing to the witness chair. Dorian had asked Meredith whether he could bring Renee's handbook. She told him no. You won't need it. She was right. Still, Dorian's hand kept moving toward the empty place where the book usually rested. Amos and Nora waited outside because the arbitration was private. Amos told anyone who asked that the boy should not have to ride home alone, whether he won or lost. Malcolm Pierce began gently. Everyone in the room understood the gentleness was a blade. Mr. Mercer, where were you living when you read the draft agreement? Behind the planter in the Sterling Dynamics lobby. Before that, shelters when beds were available. The library until it closed. Trains sometimes. You have no law degree? No, sir. No paralegal certificate? No, sir. No college degree? No, sir. No formal legal training? No, sir. And yet, a company worth several $1 billion abandoned a transaction worth roughly $400 million after listening to you. Yes, sir. Did you remove the draft from Sterling Dynamics? No, sir. I read it and returned it to the recycling bin. Did you copy it? No, sir. Then what exactly do we have? Malcolm looked toward Judge Ward, a homeless teenager's memory of a document he claims to have seen once in the dark. That is the foundation of Sterling's defense. Dorian folded his hands. Yes, sir. Then he looked at Malcolm. Would you like to test it? The room became still. Malcolm's smile narrowed. Excuse me. Clause 14b, Dorian said. Exhibit 2, page 30. Malcolm did not move. Dorian began reciting the definition. I gave the language carefully, phrase by phrase, including the categories of patents, applications, inventions, improvements, trade secrets, technical data, know-how, ownership language, affiliate language, carve-outs, and the cross-reference to Schedule C. Arden's associates followed along with their fingers on the page. Dorian continued until the definition was complete. When he stopped, nobody spoke. Judge Ward looked down at the exhibit, then back at Dorian. The witness appears to remember the document, she said. Move along, counsel. Malcolm continued. But the floor, beneath his strategy, had shifted. On redirect, Meredith shifted it farther. Mr. Mercer, in plain language, what does Clause 14b do? It harvests. Explain. The definition reaches nearly every important patent and related asset Sterling owns. Schedule C transfers those assets at closing to Arden Intellectual Property Holdings. Automatically. Yes. No additional signature. Not under the language I read. Meredith nodded. What would Sterling Dynamics have left? Dorian thought for a moment. The company could have sold itself and awakened owning much of the office furniture, while the intellectual property that gave the business value sat somewhere else. Malcolm stood. Objection. The clause speaks for itself. Judge Ward looked at him. It does. She glanced at Dorian, and at the moment it appears to speak much the way he says it does. Overruled. Meredith lifted a thin folder. Exhibit 4. The claimant's own filing. She turned toward Dorian. This is the exclusive negotiation agreement Arden is suing on. Attached is Arden Capital's corporate authorization, page 31, contains the signature of the authorizing officer. Mr. Mercer, read the name. Tobias Marsh. Meredith placed another document beside it. This is a certified state registration for the Northbridge Opportunity Foundation. The organization offered Mr. Mercer a scholarship, housing, and education funding in exchange for exclusive rights to his story and his cooperation in legal proceedings and public statements. She looked toward Dorian. Authorized officer, Tobias Marsh. A third document appeared. And this is the formation filing obtained for Arden Intellectual Property Holdings. Meredith paused. The incorporator's signature, Mr. Mercer. Tobias Marsh. She placed the documents side by side. One name, Judge Ward. One authorized officer. Signing for the investment fund, suing us, for the foundation that attempted to purchase this witness's cooperation, and for the entity receiving the patents under Schedule C. Meredith looked directly at the arbitrator. We ask that Arden be required to disclose the beneficial owner of Arden Intellectual Property Holdings. Malcolm was on his feet immediately. Irrelevant. Confidential. Improper. Judge Ward removed her glasses. Mr. Pierce, your client's entire claim depends on the argument that Sterling had no legitimate reason to terminate negotiations. She tapped the documents. If the party negotiating the acquisition secretly controlled the entity receiving the patents, that argument has a hole in it large enough to notice from Delaware. The room was completely quiet. Your client will answer, Judge Ward continued, or I will draw every adverse inference the law permits. She turned toward Harrison Keene. Mr. Keene, who owns Arden Intellectual Property Holdings. For the first time during the proceeding, Harrison looked directly at Dorian. Not at the inexpensive shoes, not at the plain tie, at his eyes. The same eyes that had read page 30 in the dark. Whatever Harrison hoped to find there, fear, mercy, uncertainty, or a price, he did not find it. On advice of counsel, Harrison said quietly, I decline to answer. The sentence landed like a verdict. Judge Ward allowed the silence to work. Then she looked at Meredith. Anything further for this witness? One question. Meredith turned toward Dorian. Mr. Mercer, why did you do it? Dorian waited. You owed Everett Sterling nothing, Meredith said. He had treated you terribly. Why read the agreement? Why warn him? Dorian looked down at his folded hands. When he answered, he did not perform. He simply placed the truth in the room. Mr. Pierce asked what qualifies me to read a contract. Dorian looked towards the attorneys. Here's my answer. My mother was Renee Mercer. She was a paralegal. Dorian swallowed once. She got sick. Her insurance policy had an exclusion on page 60. One definition, only a few words long, decided whether the company would pay for the care she needed. Nobody had explained it before. Nobody read it closely until it mattered. And by then, those words decided she wasn't covered. The room stayed still. We lost the savings first, Dorian continued. Then our apartment. Then we lost her. His voice remained steady. She died in a county hospital, teaching me the only inheritance she had left. Read every word, because every word is a witness. Dorian looked toward Malcolm Pierce. You ask why a homeless kid read a contract in the dark. Because I know what an unread page costs. It can cost savings, then a home, then a funeral. He looked around the room. People in places like this can bill $1,000 an hour and make reading sound like a privilege. It isn't. Reading is protection. Dorian turned slightly toward Everett. I didn't warn Mr. Sterling because he was kind to me. I wasn't. Everett lowered his eyes. I warned him because around 9,000 people work in that company. Somewhere in that building is a janitor with a sick spouse who trusts that somebody upstairs actually read the benefits booklet. Dorian paused. My mother wrote something in the margin of her book. Being unseen is not being unworthy. He looked directly at Judge Ward. I'm not an exception to this city. I'm proof of what it keeps throwing away. Nobody later agreed on how long the silence lasted. Judge Ward looked down at her notes. Those closest to her believed she briefly pressed a thumb near one eye. Everett sat behind his legal team and did not move. I had buried family members, rung opening bells, shaken hands with people worth billions. Years later, When someone asked him to name the proudest moment of his career, he did not mention acquisitions or market value. He said it was sitting silently in that conference room while a 19-year-old explained what reading was for, and realizing that for once, the whole country was waiting for the right person to speak. Judge Ward's written ruling followed. The claim was denied in full. The exclusive negotiation agreement was ruled unenforceable because the transaction had been procured through fraudulent concealment of Arden's interest in the entity receiving Sterling's intellectual property. The ruling also directed relevant exhibits and findings to federal regulators and the appropriate bar authorities for review of the conduct surrounding the deal and the litigation. Harrison Keene had to leave through the hotel lobby. Reporters waited. Cameras followed him toward the elevators. Former acquisition targets in Ohio and Pennsylvania began moving to unseal their old settlements. Malcolm Pierce's law firm issued a careful statement that became more noticeable for what it avoided saying than for what it said. Tobias Marsh, the busiest signature in the paperwork, stopped answering calls. Outside, a reporter shouted toward Everett, "What do you say about the homeless boy who brought down the deal?" Everett stopped. He looked directly into the cameras. "The boy I threw out saved every job in my building." He pointed once toward the reporters. "Print whatever you want about me. Just spell his name right." The legal war ended. What came after surprised almost everyone. Once the sealed cases from earlier Arden acquisitions were reopened, regulators found a roadmap. The pattern repeated. Companies purchased. Intellectual property transferred. Founders left holdings businesses that looked whole from the outside and hollow from within. Tobias Marsh decided cooperation was safer than remaining the most recognizable signature in Delaware. Arden Capital began unwinding funds and paying claims to founders whose companies had been stripped. Malcolm Pierce faced questions from bar regulators. Harrison Keene, who had spent much of his career keeping his own name away from sensitive paperwork, eventually found it attached to more documents than he had ever wanted. Documents filed by investigators and prosecutors. Nobody at Sterling Dynamics celebrated. That surprised outsiders. The stock recovered. Curtis Dalton abruptly discovered that he wanted to spend more time away from corporate boardrooms, and the company went back to work. Roughly 9,000 jobs remained intact. The patents stayed where they belonged, but the lobby did not return to normal. The corner behind the planter had become something else. The oak bench remained. So did the brass plate. When a business magazine finally photographed it, people outside the building learned what the words said. Everyone deserves a warm corner. Security adopted a quiet new custom. When someone came in from the cold, guards offered a few minutes of warmth and a cup of coffee before asking questions. Amos personally trained new security employees. His first lesson had nothing to do with cameras. "You're not guarding this building from the city," he told them. I would point toward the bench. "You're guarding what this building learned." Sterling Dynamics and Everett also helped establish the Renee Mercer Legal Literacy Fund. Its first clinics opened in neighborhood storefronts and community spaces. The promise was simple. Anyone could walk in carrying something they had been asked to sign, and someone would sit beside them and read it. Every word. For free. Lease agreements. Insurance policies. Benefits documents. Employment offers. Debt agreements. Used car loans. The fine print that quietly decides whether families remain stable or discover the problem after the signature. Everett funded the program personally. He asked that his name appear nowhere on the main wall. Only Renee's, written in a style modeled after her looping blue handwriting. The clinics measured success differently from ordinary businesses. One volunteer reviewing a father's health insurance policy found an exclusion deep in the document. The definition was broad enough to threaten coverage the family expected to need. They caught it early. The father changed insurers before the issue became a crisis. He never knew the full history behind the clinic that protected him. The volunteer did. Dorian had trained every reader using the same lesson. Page 60. One definition. One family. Read before the emergency. The fund's early report was only a page long. Thousands of families served. Hundreds of dangerous clauses identified. lives quietly protected, not counted, because many people never had to discover what nearly happened. One of the program's first classrooms opened inside the shelter Dorian visited with Amos. Fresh paint, warm lights, shelves built by Amos himself. Above the door hung a sign that made Nora read it to him more than once before he believed it. The Amos Caldwell Reading Room. Amos stood beneath the sign while children cheered. His ears turned red. "This is too much fuss," he muttered. Then, when most people looked away, he asked Nora quietly to take one more photograph. Dorian watched from the back of the room. The feeling in his chest was unfamiliar, because it carried no claws. His life had become strange and busy. Scholarship offers came after the arbitration. Real ones. Dorian read every word anyway. He chose a state university across the river. He worked at Sterling Dynamics during the day and attended classes at night. He spent regular dinners at the Caldwell house, where the chair at the table had stopped being described as the guest chair. It was simply Dorian's chair. The room above the garage gained a bookshelf, so heavy Amos joked that removing it would require rebuilding the wall. On Dorian's first day at the university, a contracts professor asked whether anyone could explain fraudulent inducement. Dorian raised his hand. I kept the answer short. Word still spread. By lunch, students knew the young man from the Arden hearing was in their section. At Sterling Dynamics, Dorian's title remained legal researcher. His performance review happened exactly as scheduled, because he had insisted on it. Meredith wrote one sentence in the space for overall assessment. He reads like it matters because he knows it does. Rowan Blake began giving Dorian office gossip and half his difficult drafts. The associates who once buried him under boxes began standing near his desk with their own agreements. Can you break this before the other side does? Some of them learned to enjoy having their work torn apart by a teenager with a pencil. Somewhere along the way, a few became his friends. Dorian's desk sat beside a window. If he stood and looked down, he could see the lobby, the bench, the planter, the square of marble where Everett Sterling had once told him to fetch. Everett eventually returned Renee's handbook without ceremony. I had kept it for months, longer than almost any document he had ever reviewed personally. Dorian opened the book that evening. The margins had changed. Beside Renee's blue handwriting was a second conversation. Everett had written in careful black ink, questions, answers, arguments, occasional apologies, page after page. Then Dorian reached page 212. Renee's sentence was still there. Teach Dorian that being unseen is not being unworthy. Beside it, Everett had added 4 words. So did I. No signature. Nothing else. Dorian sat with the book open for a long time. Renee had spent much of her life reading other people's words, so they would understand what they were agreeing to. Now people were reading hers. The handbook had been a survival tool, then evidence, then a bridge. Finally, it became what Renee had intended all along. An inheritance. Everett changed too, although much of the change was too ordinary for magazines. He still ran a demanding company. He still expected people to meet deadlines. He still negotiated hard, but regularly. A man in a plain sweater sat at the back of the shelter reading room taking notes like a student. Sometimes Everett taught a class himself. He called it what chief executive officers miss in contracts. Attendance was always full. Sophie graded him mercilessly. Another winter came. Snow covered the city again. Dorian taught a class at the reading room. Children and adults worked through a used car financing agreement one of the parents had brought. Sophie, now older and fiercely confident with words, had appointed herself teaching assistant. She took attendance with the seriousness of a federal marshal. After class, while people zipped their coats and chairs scraped across the floor, Sophie helped Dorian stack workbooks. Then she asked the question the whole story seemed to have been waiting for. What if you read everything, find the bad part, and nobody listens? Dorian stopped. Sophie continued. Like if you tell them, and they laugh at you anyway. For a moment, Dorian was 19 again in a marble lobby. Snow beyond the doors. His mother's book in another man's hand. A few seconds of a powerful person's attention disappearing in front of him. Then you read it louder, Dorian said. Sophie watched him. You stand there, and you stay, and you read it again. What if the person you're talking to still doesn't listen? Dorian smiled slightly. Somebody else in the room is listening. I thought about the scrap of paper beneath the reception desk. The cleaner who found it. Amos opening the side door. Meredith following the cross-references. The engineers leaving coffee. Sophie herself. It's almost never only the person you're speaking to, Dorian said. Somebody hears. Sophie considered the answer in silence. Then she stored it away the way she stored everything. Permanently. Dorian walked home through the snow. He passed Sterling Dynamics Tower. The lobby glowed warm through the glass. Someone sat on the oak bench. A stranger in a wet coat, both hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee. A security guard stood nearby. The guard was not demanding identification, not ordering the person outside, just standing watch. Dorian stopped on the sidewalk. I was standing close to the place where he had once dried his mother's wet handbook page by page with his sleeve. He watched the warm corner do its quiet work. Then he turned up his collar and continued toward home. The porch light at the Caldwell house was always left on now. Nora said the question of where Dorian belonged had been answered permanently. In the end, the bench was never really about furniture. It was about what buildings and people choose to do when life gives them another chance. Everett got a second chance to see the person in front of him. Amos got his career back with the respect it should have carried all along. Renee Mercer, a paralegal who spent years doing work that appeared beneath other people's names, finally saw her own name carried into rooms she never lived to enter. And Dorian learned that being heard does not always begin with the person you are trying to convince. Sometimes truth reaches the room sideways. Through a cleaner who notices a scrap of paper. Through a guard who remembers a cold young man. Through an attorney willing to follow an uncomfortable cross-reference. Through a child learning which sentence in a lease means the landlord has to fix the heat. Every word is a witness. That was Renee's whole case, and in the end, she won it. But there is another lesson here. One that reaches beyond contracts, courtrooms, billion-dollar companies, and hidden holding entities. Dorian was right about Clause 14b before Everett knew his name. How was right before anyone offered him a job. How was right when he was still standing in a gray coat, asking only for a warm corner. His value did not begin when Sterling Dynamics gave him a badge. It did not begin when television learned his story. It did not begin when a retired judge listened to him recite a contract from memory. The world simply noticed late. That distinction matters. Too often, people confuse recognition with worth. They assume someone becomes important when a title appears, when money arrives, when a camera turns, or when powerful people finally say the person's name correctly. But Dorian had already been carrying intelligence, discipline, grief, compassion, and character through every night the city looked past him. The badge changed who could enter certain rooms. It did not change who Dorian was. The same is true for people we pass every day. A person sleeping in a shelter may know something nobody in a boardroom knows. A security guard may understand the purpose of a building better than the people whose names are on the doors. A paralegal may catch the sentence an attorney misses. A child may ask the question adults have become too proud to ask. We do not have to know someone's hidden talent before treating them with respect. We do not need proof that a stranger might someday save our company. Human dignity is not an investment we make because it might produce a return. It is something we owe each other before we know what the other person can do for us. Everett learned that painfully. His first instinct was to judge the coat, the smell of winter, and the place Dorian occupied in the lobby. High-thought power gave him the right to decide who belonged inside warmth. Then the person he treated as disposable protected him anyway. Dorian's decision to warn Everett is one of the most important choices in the story. Not because Everett deserved kindness in that moment. I had not earned it. Dorian warned him because thousands of other lives were tied to the company. Because somewhere inside that tower were workers with rent due, children at home, medical bills, and futures connected to patents they would never personally read. Dorian could separate a person from the consequences surrounding that person. That is a mature kind of compassion. It does not require pretending cruelty was acceptable. Dorian still demanded an apology. He still required Amos to be restored. He still refused charity disguised as respect. He set clear terms. He protected his dignity. Forgiveness, when it appeared, did not erase responsibility. That matters too. Kindness without boundaries can become permission for harm. Boundaries without humanity can become revenge. Dorian found a path between them. He did not ask Everett to suffer simply because Everett had made him suffer. He asked Everett to repair what he could. Say the name you refused to learn. Restore the guard you punished for being decent. Offer real work instead of a pity payment. Read the book of the woman whose memory you threw into the snow. Those conditions were not about humiliation. They were about education. Everett's apology mattered because it happened in the same place where his contempt had been public. Amos's restoration mattered because loyalty should not be punished when it protects human life. The job mattered because Dorian did not want to be rescued from the outside. I wanted the chance to earn his place through work. And the handbook mattered because change often begins when one person is willing to enter another person's story slowly enough to understand it. Everett could have written a check and returned to business as usual. Reading Renee's notes made that impossible. I encountered a woman he had never met through sentences written in blue ink. He learned that a person can be absent from the room and still change it. There is also something important in Amos's advice. Stay when it's hard. Not every good choice creates an immediate reward. Dorian told the truth in the lobby and was thrown into the snow. Amos showed mercy and lost his job. Meredith challenged the deal and faced pressure from the board. Everett refused a dishonest settlement and risked his position. Employees supported Dorian while the company's stock was falling. For a while, doing the right thing made almost everything more difficult. That is often why courage feels so rare. If every good decision were immediately rewarded, we would call it strategy, not courage. Courage is what remains when you cannot guarantee the outcome. Dorian had no guarantee when he warned Everett. Amos had no guarantee when he opened the side door. The cleaner had no guarantee when she saved the handwritten note instead of throwing it away. Rowan had no guarantee when he stopped treating Dorian like an embarrassment and began standing beside him. Everett had no guarantee when he refused to sacrifice one young man to calm a boardroom. They acted anyway. The story also reminds us that power can correct itself only when people inside it are willing to become teachable. Everett did not become admirable because he made one apology. He became better because the apology changed what he did afterward. He restored Amos. I heard Dorian under real standards. He terminated a dangerous transaction. He protected Dorian when abandoning him would have been cheaper. He created a warm bench. He funded legal literacy clinics. I kept showing up to learn. An apology is a beginning, not a finish line. The same principle applies in ordinary life. Saying I'm sorry can matter deeply, but real remorse grows visible through behavior. Do we make the same choice again? Do we repair what can be repaired? Do we listen differently the next time? Do we become safer for other people? Renee's lesson about words also reaches beyond legal documents. Words are witnesses because words reveal what we believe. The word Everett, used in the lobby, revealed how quickly he had reduced Dorian to something less than human. The words in Clause 14b revealed a hidden business strategy. The words in the scholarship agreement revealed an attempt to buy silence. The words in the lawsuit revealed Arden's need to turn the victim into a trespasser. And the words beside page 212 revealed a mother's deepest hope for her son. Words matter because they carry intention. That does not mean every mistake in language makes someone cruel. It means we should learn to pay attention to what our words are doing, especially when power is uneven. A chief executive officer's joke can become permission for an entire lobby to laugh. A security guard's simple sentence can create warmth. A child's question can reopen a truth adults have tried to forget. A handwritten note can protect thousands of jobs. And sometimes, 4 words in a margin can change the way a powerful man understands himself. So here is a question worth carrying from Dorian's story. If you had only a few seconds to make someone powerful truly listen, what would you say? Would you rush? Would you shout? Would you shrink? because the room had already decided you were unimportant? Or could you stand there, breathe, and say the one true thing that needs to be heard? Maybe the deeper question is what we do when we are the powerful person receiving that warning. Do we hear the message, or do we first judge the messenger? There will always be people who arrive without the right coat, the right degree, the right address, the right title, or the polished vocabulary we expect. Some of them will still be right. Some will be wrong. The point is not to believe every stranger without question. The point is to give facts a fair hearing before pride decides the answer. Everett did not need to accept Dorian's warning blindly. He only needed to read page 30. That small act of verification would have saved humiliation, fear, and regret. Listening does not mean surrendering judgment. Sometimes listening is what makes good judgment possible. And if you have ever been the person nobody saw, Dorian's story carries another message. Keep learning. Keep showing up. Keep your dignity even when other people fail to recognize it. You may not receive a dramatic boardroom moment. The world may never apologize as publicly as Everett did. But another person's blindness does not define your value. Being unseen is not being unworthy. Renee wrote that sentence for her son. It belongs to more people than she ever knew. Maybe you work in a place where your name is rarely said. Maybe you are rebuilding after losing a home, a job, a relationship, or the life you thought you would have. Maybe somebody looked at your clothes, your accent, your education, your age, or your circumstances and decided they already understood you. They do not. Your next chapter is not limited by the narrowest thing someone once believed about you. At the same time, when life gives you influence, remember the warm corner. Maybe you will never own an office tower. You can still leave a chair open. You can still make room. You can still notice when somebody is cold, confused, overwhelmed, or being ignored. You can still be Amos. You can still be the cleaner who saves the note. You can still be Meredith, willing to read the uncomfortable clause. You can still be Sophie, asking the question that keeps truth alive. And if you ever become Everett, if you ever realize that your pride hurt someone who had less power than you can still choose what happens the second time. The bench in the Sterling lobby was never about furniture. It was proof that a building can remember. People can remember too. Not only the harm, the correction, the second chance. The moment somebody says, "We did this wrong before, and we will not do it the same way again." That is how responsibility becomes culture. That is how regret becomes repair. That is how one warm corner can become thousands of careful readings. Families protected from bad clauses, children learning their rights, and a paralegal's name finally written where strangers can see it. Every word is a witness. Renee believed that. Dorian lived it. Everett learned it. And maybe the rest of us can carry it forward. If this story moved you, think about one person in your life who may feel unseen. Not because you need something from them. Not because they might secretly be extraordinary. Simply because they are there. Say their name. Ask how they are doing. Listen to the answer. And if somebody comes to you with a warning you do not want to hear, read the page before you dismiss the person holding it. You never know which sentence is trying to save you. Keep reading. Keep showing up. And when life finally gives you enough warmth to share, save somebody else a corner.